Before we get into what happened, I want to clarify for better understanding that our house once belonged to two families. Therefore, both the first and ground floors have separate kitchens and bathrooms. We also have a basement that connects to the garage. But until 2018, my wife and I didn't really use the first floor kitchen, and we rarely used the bathroom either. Things changed when our son was born, and going downstairs simply became too tiring in the middle of the night, and that's where all the weird stuff started. It started with small things. We'd wake up in the morning and discover the door to the downstairs office was open, or something was lying where it shouldn't be. Sometimes that something was even chairs. We also started finding plates in the living room, cups in the bathroom, and so on. But hey, we were both tired. Our son wouldn't sleep. The house was in total chaos, and we'd even had episodes of sleepwalking beforehand. So for a long time, we found excuses, assuming that one of us had gone downstairs in the middle of the night, out of habit, and simply didn't remember it. Having 3 cats that you can blame helped too. Then, my wife claimed several times that she'd wake up at night and hear strange sounds coming from downstairs. I've had similar experiences, but then again, 3 cats in one house. Then she claimed to see someone's hand downstairs as she passed the stairs, but once again, we assumed she was still half asleep or it was a shadow or something like that. What really got us worried was a hat. A red winter hat we found in the downstairs bathroom, between the bathtub and the washing machine. We had many visitors during this time, everybody wanting to meet our son, but we couldn't recognize it anyway. Even after taking a photo and sending it to family and friends, nobody picked it up. I remember that night we spent a long time walking around the house, making sure that all the windows and doors were closed. But honestly, I feel like it still hasn't hit us that the situation could be serious. I have no idea if it was denial, like stuff like this doesn't happen to people like us, or just plain I'm too tired to care about this too. But then the best possible coincidence happened. My friend was replacing the cameras in her house. The old ones still worked, but the quality was worse, and sometimes they would turn off, losing 5 to 30 minutes of recording. Initially, she planned to throw them away, but I ended up coming home with her old cameras, and honestly, bless her for giving them to me. After the first night with the cameras, we couldn't deny it any longer. We had to call the police. 3 people, 2 men and 1 woman, entered our house through the basement around midnight and spent time on the ground floor. 1 man and woman looked young, maybe in their early 20s. He had many tattoos on both hands. She had long hair in a braid and wore a dress, and she came with a large gym bag. The other man looked older, must have been around 40, and was tall and muscular. Let me put it this way, he alone could have knocked out both me and my wife. And while the other 2 were just hanging out in our house, this man went up to the first floor. Unfortunately, there weren't enough cameras, so I have no idea what he was doing, but the footage shows he didn't return to the second floor until about an hour later. What happened next? Mostly a lot of waiting. My brother and my wife's father lived with us for a while. We changed the locks in the entire house just in case, and with police, we searched the entire basement. The basement is 2 small and almost empty rooms. There's 1 window, but only a cat could squeeze through it, and it's covered with grates, which finally led to the garage. And that's how my wife and I found out our garage was unlocked. To this day, we have no idea if one of us had left it unlocked or if these people had managed to open it. Police haven't confirmed anything, only that they found fingerprints all over the gate. But yes, they were coming and going through the garage the entire time, and we not having a car and treating the garage more like a storage unit didn't even notice. Basically, anybody could come and go in our house whenever they wanted. What happened next? Unfortunately, there was no perfect ending. Initially, the police were very involved, patrolling the area, updating us weekly on progress, and suggesting that we seek lawyers and prepare for further action, etc. But then we saw them less and less. All we learned was that this older man matched the appearance of the man who attacked the cashier at the gas station on the other side of town. But they didn't have a name. He wasn't in the police database either. Nobody has heard anything about the other 2. Did anything strange happen after all of this? Yes, because one night we heard a loud bang outside. We called the police and nothing was found. Do we still live here? Yes, but over the years we've replaced all the doors and windows. The basement is completely locked at night, and we have motion sensors and more cameras, and our 3 cats have been joined by a big dog. What about our cats in all this mess? Unfortunately, the cameras prove that these little traitors were surprisingly okay with strangers in our home. And my wife and I try to keep it light now, but it was actually traumatic. We both went through a lot of what-if scenarios, thinking about all the situations in which we could accidentally go downstairs and meet these people. For a long time, my wife was afraid to go down to the basement alone. Honestly, same. The fact that we had a small child only added to the guilt, but it's better now. Honestly, this is probably the only crazy story in my life, and unfortunately, I don't remember all the details. And before writing this post, I had to contact my parents and older sister. I was 7 years old, and as always, I came home after school. My parents and sister still weren't there. Nothing unusual. I was alone for an hour every day. There were general rules like don't open the door to strangers, etc. But that day, while I was waiting for the others to return, somebody was persistently knocking on the door and ringing the bell. I don't know if I went out onto the balcony or opened the window, but it turned out they were close friends, married couple of my parents. I remember they were very annoyed when they saw me and told me to leave the house immediately. Okay, so no stranger. I left the house. Here again, I don't remember if they told me this first or if I was already in the car, but they said that my sister had a minor accident at training and she's in the hospital, and my parents asked them to take care of me. But for some reason, they couldn't do it at our house, so I had to go to theirs. I had an old phone at the time, but I left it at home. I didn't have any spare clothes, toys, school things, etc., and I have one very clear memory of them getting irritated with me when I asked them about it. Like, they really acted like they got a last-minute call from my parents and I just ruined their day. But once we were at their house, they were nice. She played with me and I remember falling asleep on their couch the first day while watching one of the Barbie movies. Honestly, I'm glad I contacted my parents because up until that moment, I thought I'd been there for 4 days. But according to my mother, I've been gone for 2 weeks. 2 full weeks, during which my family, teachers, friends, and friends' parents panicked and lost their minds. And this woman? She comforted my mother and assured her that I would be found someday and maybe I hid in one of my friends' houses. I can safely say that I don't remember anything traumatic. I was only yelled at once when I started asking about my parents one day. The rest was strangely carefree. Like, I remember lots of fun. A cute dog, garden with lots of toys, walking through woods and collecting leaves, etc. Not many other thoughts. I was convinced it was the couple's house and I had visited them here before. However, my parents told me many years later that it was a completely different house. Honestly, the day I was found was probably the most dramatic. Like, I remember lying in bed when the police literally broke down the door and there was a lot of screaming. Then suddenly my parents appeared in the room and started dragging me to the car. Like, no, hello, good morning, just pure rage. And then one policeman tried to stop them because they wanted to talk to me. And they started arguing, and my mother said she almost slapped that policeman over there, and she also wanted to hit me because I apparently asked her if we could take the dog with us. My father claims he doesn't remember that part, and my sister says I did say something about a dog later. But everybody agrees it was pure chaos, and all the adults were arguing with each other, and then the police were angry with us because talking to me was pretty useless. The good news is that I was the first and only victim of this couple and they wanted to keep me. I remember the first time I told somebody outside my family about this was when I was 15 and one of my friends replied, "So you were kidnapped?" And like, I know it sounds stupid, but it was literally only then that I actually thought, wait, somebody kidnapped me. I guess it's because nothing happened to me. Like, even now when I think about kidnapping, I imagine something terrible. But that time was like a weird school break. Almost a year ago, I, 24 male, was fresh out of college and had just moved into an apartment with my middle school best friend, 23 female, and her fiance. This was after a long period of not seeing her in person. My best friend and I had a very long and great relationship with a few rocky periods. I didn't know the fiance well, but had met him a couple of times. He came off as kind of rude and loud, but mostly nice enough. I let a lot of little annoying behaviors slide because she was so in love with him. I really just wanted to spend time with my best friend. Over the course of a few months, I slowly discovered that she was trapped in an abusive relationship with the most classic example of a malignant narcissist imaginable. Their fights, really just him raging at her while she cried, escalated to the point where he was completely trashing the apartment, breaking her phone and laptop, hiding her car keys, blocking the door, and grabbing her arm so hard she had bruises. all while hurling out the worst insults he could possibly fathom at the top of his lungs for hours. This man is about a foot taller and 100 pounds heavier than me, so there was nothing I could do, other than give her a ride somewhere else away from him until the next day. He didn't like it when I did that. Once it reached the point of physical harm against her, I put my foot down and demanded that he move out or I would call the cops. He wasn't technically signed onto the lease, so I could have kicked him out. He begged for time to find a new place. He was extremely drunk and high the night he hurt her, and he promised to stay sober until he moved. Not wanting to escalate things, I agreed on the condition that nothing like that ever happened again. My friends and her fiancé broke up soon after that. 3 weeks passed and everything is going great. My friend's ex-fiancé has found a new place and is in training for a new job, and while still loud and inconsiderate, he hasn't caused any problems so far. I get ready for bed early. I have an important meeting early tomorrow. I put on some comfy pajamas, locking my door before I change out of habit. My friend is out working and it's just me upstairs in bed and her ex-fiancé downstairs yelling on the phone about something. I tune him out and try to sleep. He's moving out next week. My chest rattles from the booming footfalls up the stairs to my room, waking me from my sleep. My eyes snap open to see my bedroom doorknob rattling back and forth. Locked. He lets out a yell of pure malice and bangs on my door. Starts screaming my name, and it's so slurred he sounds like he's trying to impersonate a lizard man. The hinges aren't looking so good. We lived in a crappy cheap apartment with thin doors. I have to do something before he breaks open the door, right? I say the only thing I can think of. What the heck? Suddenly, the banging and screaming stop. My doorknob falls still. After a terrifying moment of silence, he says flatly, "Open the door, bud. Just come and open the door." I still laugh about that one. Like after all of that, I just walk over and open up. Instead, I grab my essentials and jumped out the window. I was on the second floor, but we lived on a hill, so the fall wasn't quite that high. Still managed to fall wrong. I hobbled as quickly as I could to my car and peeled away. I called my best friend and warned her not to go home. We made plans for her to stay with a friend after she got off work. I made it to the friend's house and passed out for a few hours. I woke up to a call from my bestie. He traveled all the way to her workplace with a knife and broke in. He assaulted her and held the knife up to her special needs client's throat and said that he'd kill him in front of her. Thankfully, a coworker overheard everything in another room and was able to call the police in time for everyone to come out alive. My best friend also said he was on the phone with her while he was banging on my door, and he said he was going to kill me and make her listen. I was totally alone in the apartment with him, sleeping upstairs in my bed. If I hadn't locked my door that night, would I even still be alive? If I had left my car keys downstairs, would I have been able to get away? When I returned to my apartment the next morning, my bedroom door was completely kicked in. My belongings were scattered everywhere, and the large butcher knives were missing from the kitchen, instead sitting in the corner of the hallway to my room. So about 9 years ago, my boyfriend, now husband 44 male and I 40 female, were driving cross country from California to Florida. My husband had an enormous Roddy named Kuma. It means bear in Japanese, and it fit. He was 110 pounds. I'd only just met Kuma, maybe 2 days prior, since my hubby and I were in a long-distance relationship at the time. So we, Kuma and I, didn't know each other well yet, but he was a great boy and talked a lot. We called them Umble Grumbles. We stopped at a gas station so that we could all get out, stretch, and use the bathroom. He got Kuma on his leash and said he'd take him for a walk. I offered to do it instead since I didn't need to use the restroom urgently. Now, I'm not a small girl. I'm 5'10", but I am petite, as my husband calls me, maybe 125 pounds. My husband is almost 6'5" and built like a Viking, so a dog Kuma's size wouldn't affect him one way or another if he tried to bolt chasing a squirrel or something. I, on the other hand, will admit I was nervous once he handed me the leash to hold him because if he decided to try anything, I wasn't big or strong enough to stop him. My husband noticed my nervousness. He just smiled and said, "Don't worry, he's well trained. He won't take off and won't let anything happen to you." It's important to note that Kuma had no formal protection training. He just loved whatever his dad did and knew he was supposed to protect and keep it safe when dad wasn't there to do it himself. Once he was sure I was comfortable, my husband headed inside, leaving Kuma and me near the far right side of the gas station, with a little dirt path near a wooded area. It was very dark and there was little light being shed so far from the building, but it was a busy little station and I could see people, so I didn't feel isolated or anything. So I start to walk slowly, allowing Kuma to take in his surroundings when I hear a noise coming from behind me. I turn startled to see a man walking. He noticed me and slows his gait, looks around, back at me, then smiles eerily. Uh-oh. He changes direction suddenly, heading directly towards me. He says, "It's awfully dangerous out here alone. Are you alone?" Something in his eyes told me to run. Just as I'm about to bolt and start hustling towards the people and lights of the station, I hear another sound. This one is new to me. As I clenched my hand, preparing to run or die fighting off Creepy McCreeperson, I felt something. The leash. Kuma. In that moment, I'd forgotten that I wasn't alone at all. Not by a long shot. The sound I heard was a warning. A very lethal one. It was the deepest, most menacing growl I've ever heard come out of anything. That beautiful beast stepped up from behind me, where he'd been observing the threat like a giant dragon rising from the shadows. The man's creepy smile slipped right off his face. Kuma placed his large body between mine and the approaching strangers and pressed back against me, urging me towards the jeep. He didn't have to tell me twice. I turned and started to make my way back to the car, still holding the leash for dear life. He walked backward, pressed against me the whole time, watching my back until we made it back to where we had parked. I tried to look for the man, but he either ran back to wherever he'd come from or made it inside, taking a much longer route, well outside Kuma's reach. I told my husband what happened, and honestly, I'm not sure who would have done more damage to that unfortunate man had they located him. Every day for the next 9 years, Kuma was my best friend and guardian. Rest in peace, baby boy. This is a situation I found out about 8 months ago, but it has stayed in my mind ever since. For context, as a child, I had severe speech delay. I was completely mute up until a few weeks before kindergarten. This caused me to have a speech impediment, which I technically still have to this day, but to a lesser extent. I'm lucky enough that the letters I have trouble with match up with the letters often dropped in certain accents, so to the untrained ear, I sound British or Australian depending on who you ask. Because of this, I often just confirm their accent assumption because it's easier to lie about being British than to explain the speech impediment thing and face any stigma that goes with it. The only people who know the truth are very close friends and family. On to the story. I, 18 female, was dating a girl, 18 female. We are no longer seeing each other, but for reasons unrelated to the story. We were at a social event when we met up with one of her friends, 19 female. I technically have known this girl since grade 9 as well, but not well. So, we as a group get to talking. Randomly, completely unrelated to the current conversation, a friend asks me how my mom is doing. I'm caught off guard because that's not usually something you throw into a conversation without knowing, said mom. So I ask back, why? Do you know her? Friend goes on to explain that my mom used to be her EA and had helped her work out her behavioral issues all throughout elementary and middle school. Now, this is weird because although my mom did work in a school for a brief time, she was a lunchtime supervisor and only ever worked in one elementary school. An elementary school I know the friend didn't go to. So I asked my friend if she's sure it was my mom, because she wasn't an EA. A friend confirms because my mom used to talk about me all the time, and when the friend was deciding which high school to go to, my mom recommended my high school because that was the school her daughter went to. Now, within my high school, there were a few people with the same name as me. My name is about as basic white bitch as they come. So I asked a friend, are you sure it's me who she was talking about and not one of the other people with my name? She once again confirms it was definitely me because my mom would tell her details about my life and told her about my time going to speech therapy. Now hold up. As I said earlier, I'm very secretive about the fact that I have a speech impediment. This friend is clearly somebody I have never told, although I will admit it's not impossible to guess. And the girl I was dating at the time could have told her. But I have never, and I mean never, ever, told anyone about going to speech therapy. That's just never a detail I share when telling my life story. It's clear that somebody who knows me like family is telling her this stuff. There's no way a friend could have accurately guessed so many details about my life. So just to confirm that somehow my real mother doesn't have a double life, I ask a friend what my mother looks like. She responds that she's somewhat short with curly brown hair. That's not my mother. My mom is tall and blonde. This, though, is exactly what my first speech therapist looked like. She was hired through the school district, and I saw her for about 2 years before she switched to another school. She also worked with a variety of special needs, meaning it's very likely she went on to become Friend's EA. But all this to say, Somewhere out there, this speech therapist is for some reason pretending to be my mother, and to some extent stalking me, as she would have had to have done research to find out what high school I went to. Additional bonus story that I remembered while writing this post. When I was a child, but after I had switched speech therapist, I was in a store with my mother where there was a shiny blue guitar. I, being a child and liking shiny blue things, really wanted this guitar. My mom clearly said no, as it was expensive and I have shown little interest in playing the guitar, besides watching my dad play his bass. I was disappointed but understood. Out of the blue, my first speech therapist shows up and buys the guitar for me. My mom told her that she didn't have to, but my speech therapist insisted. At the time, this just seemed like a nice thing she did, albeit overly generous, but now knowing she's parading around pretending to be my real mom, it definitely paints me the situation in a different light. I don't know how to feel about that gift now. So, I live in the city now, but when I was younger, I used to regularly visit my grandma's house with my dad. My cousins were almost always there too. And we used to play together when I was little in that village. Well, more like a smaller town. When my cousins and I went to play at the park, there was always this abandoned club nearby. It used to be popular back in the day, but now all the windows were broken. The door was made of glass, and almost everything was vandalized with graffiti everywhere. I was always curious about what was inside, but I never had the guts to even ask my cousins to go in there. Even during the day, the club felt so off. I don't even know why. Maybe because it was surrounded by trees. It just had this weird vibe. When I was around 13 or 14, I don't remember exactly, I had a friend who was in the same grade as me, but he moved to another country. He would visit every summer, and every time he came back, he'd call me up. One summer, we were really bored, and the idea came up that we should finally go to that abandoned club. He was braver than me, so he said he'd go in first because there's no way I'd have the balls to go first. Around 10 p.m., we arrived there with our bikes. It was pitch dark, with maybe 2 or 3 lampposts spaced far apart, so the lighting was really dim. When we stood in front of the club, it felt eerie. We spent like 20 minutes just trying to gather the courage to go in. Finally, we did. We climbed over the broken glass of the door and squeezed through. Once we were inside, we turned on our phone flashlights. The place was a complete mess, with garbage bags all over the walls and some needles on the ground, which was honestly really creepy to see. And the whole interior was just weird. It was a pretty big space with these old architecture paths that led around in circles for no reason. My friends and I were scared shitless. We tried to stay as quiet as possible so we wouldn't wake up some junkie or whatever else might have been living there. Then, while I was staring at the bar counter for like 5 seconds, my friend disappeared. My heart dropped. I did a full 360 with the flashlight and he was gone. I yelled his name and then something jumped on me from behind. It was him, laughing so hard while I was having a heart attack. I was so mad but also super relieved. While he was laughing, I suddenly heard another laugh, one that wasn't his. I'd actually heard it at first but didn't fully register it until it clicked. That laugh wasn't supposed to be there. I turned my flashlight toward the sound and there was this guy, a hobo I think, tall, skinny, and had long messy hair. I couldn't even see his face properly. I screamed and bolted out of there with my friend. We jumped on our bikes and pedaled so hard back to my grandma's house. That was seriously one of the scariest things I've ever experienced. Later that night, when we finally talked about it, how did we not hear him? We were dead silent. Every step we made was so loud. So, how the heck did he get that close without a sound? And the fact that he was laughing with us made it so much creepier. He's probably insane or something. About a month ago, I moved into a house near the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. It's very secluded. Everything was great up until about a week ago when strange things started happening. Not like paranormal, just strange. So I knew moving in that I would have about 1 acre to myself, which is nice. The acre itself is just about all thick, dense woods. Towards the back, you can't even go any deeper because the land is too rigid and the trees block a clear path of sight into anything. Now I live alone in this tiny house at the moment. My brother and his dog are moving in a couple of weeks. The house is pretty small and it has a basement with a sliding door to the backyard, which has a little tiny picket fence that could be knocked down completely if somebody were to just, let's say, blow on it. I decided I'd start fixing it up for my brother's dog until he becomes well trained enough to know when to come back home and stuff. This is when the first creepy thing happened. I left to go to Lowe's to just buy some basic wood for a fence, just enough to make sure the dog couldn't leap over it if he tried. As I was coming back home, I noticed a man on my doorstep, looking inside my house through the side window. Even though any person could have heard me pulling into my driveway, he didn't flinch at all, even when I slammed the car door shut. Eventually, at this point, I kind of uneasily said, "Can I help you?" To which the man replied, "I'm just your neighbor and I wanted to say hello." I went out of my way to put the wood I was carrying in my hand down on the ground and went to shake his hand, and he didn't even move again. He just stared at my hand. After this very weird encounter, I was more of just done with him, so I said that I was very busy because I was fixing my fence and that it was nice to meet him. He stayed at the front of my house for about another 2 minutes, watched me put all my wood inside the living room of my house, looking onto and around my house in the process. Creeped out at this point, I just closed the door on his face and went on with my business. About 2 days later, into fixing my fence, another woman, this one looking nicer and having put a little effort into her appearance, greeted me kindly and told me about herself. Now, I'll call her Miss H. Miss H was just explaining how people don't normally move around here, and I was the first in about 11 years. She went on to explain the rest of my neighbors whom I know were around and that most of them like to keep to themselves. After a pleasant talk with Miss H, I asked her about the man from 2 days ago. Now, this guy was about 6 feet tall, old but not too old, probably mid-50s with brown eyes, in decent shape and with gray hair. Miss H went on to explain that the person who lived here before me was a widow and her teenage daughter, whom she homeschooled, had left because this perv started to stalk her daughter. She told me a little bit more about everything and she eventually left, and that was that. Last night though, I heard a tapping on my window at exactly 2:37 a.m. I know this because I looked at my clock. Now, my window is a good 4 feet above the actual ground below it, and I figured it was just a bird or something, so I went back to bed. Not less than 2 minutes after silence, the tapping became 3 loud bangs. Immediately, I ran to the closet and grabbed my hunting .22 and hid behind my bed. Peeking over, I saw a figure looking into it. After being scared shitless for 30 seconds, the familiar voice of that perv shouted, "I need your help." Not knowing what to do, I threw my curtain open, and the only thing between his forehead and my .22 was the half-inch thick glass of my window. He then didn't say a word. Not a "don't shoot," not a "I still need help." Nothing. He then pointed himself to the fence I was building. I then ran outside to see what he wanted, and this time with the gun on him, I said, "What's wrong?" And he said nothing but pointed to my fence again. I looked, and this time I saw the fence had seemed to be run over by a car, with mud tracks stopping and then being reversed in the grass. I looked at the 50-something-year-old's car, whose tires were dirty and had tracks coming from my backyard. Pissed at what I saw, I yelled at him, "What the heck, man?" And then I put my finger on the trigger of the .22, to which he finally replied, "Your fence." He then got back in his car and left, all while I still had the .22 pointed at him. It is currently 3 p.m. on March 2nd, and I've scrapped the entire fence idea out of sheer exhaustion and fear. This has all really happened and is currently happening, and I'll keep you guys updated with the situation. I haven't contacted the police yet because I don't know if he meant to run into my fence or not, but either way, I have no idea why he was in my driveway, let alone on my property. I work a graveyard shift as a security guard for a recycling yard. I can't say the company for obvious reasons. I've been on this site for 2 weeks, this being the second. Basically every hour I make rounds across a giant recycling yard covered in various precious metals that are broken down and sold. During my shift, I scan various checkpoints and ensure nobody besides me is in the yard or facility. One of my other tasks is to go through some grassy and bushy terrain and over a set of train tracks to take a photo of a warehouse far across. This is to ensure it is safe and clear. I have to use a flashlight with 2K lumens so I can see my way through pretty much the entire yard. Well, just an hour and a half ago on my round, I went through the grass and over the train tracks. I took the picture of the warehouse and submitted it. All of a sudden, I get the intense feeling that I'm being watched. The hairs on my neck stand up and I freeze. My flashlight is still on and pointing at the warehouse. I slowly turn around and point my flashlight behind me. Kid you not, about 10 yards away, I see a skinny, old, wrinkled white man with a large white beard sitting on a chair. He was looking directly at me. He had dirty jean overalls and what I think was a Western-style cowboy fedora on. He was bare-skinned under the overalls. Now, I'm a 6 foot, 220-pound man, but even I screamed the F word at the top of my lungs. Accidentally, I dropped my flashlight out of shock. Mind you, there are thin, tiny metal shards literally everywhere on the ground. I can't see a damn thing now, as the flashlight is facing away from my sight. All I hear is the quick-paced shuffling and clanging of metal from footsteps quickly running towards me. Once the metal crunching footsteps are within maybe 5 feet of me, I hear them quickly veer to the left and past me. Within 3 to 4 seconds, the metal clanging is gone, followed by the fairway sound of rustling bushes. I then grabbed my flashlight from the ground and pointed at the sound. The old man was gone, past the bushes to who knows where. I was shaking from adrenaline and fear. I managed to catch my breath and called several emergency contacts. When they arrived, the old man was long gone. I believe maybe he was just there to watch the active trains move across. I say this because the metal chair was facing the tracks. It's still there. I took a photo of it. More as a memento, if anything. I'm now in the office, still terrified and alone. I have to finish my shift tonight and tomorrow do another 11-hour graveyard. I won't quit as I need the money. I just wanted to get this off my chest. I want to preface this story with the day we moved into my new townhome. My brother and I had lived together for a long time, so moving in together wasn't unusual. On the very first morning in our new place, I stepped outside to smoke a cigarette. My brother followed me and we were talking about football when he suddenly froze, pointing toward the wooden frame of our covered patio. Written in big black marker was my name, Ryan. Neither of us had friends or family over yet because we moved everything ourselves. I hadn't been there the night before. We stood there confused but never figured out how it got there. Now, fast forward 2 months. One night I went to a bar down the street with a good friend while my brother stayed home. It was a normal night. I left the bar, grabbed some food, and got back around 1 a.m. My brother was already asleep, so I ate, went upstairs with my German Shepherd, and crashed. The next morning, I noticed something immediately wrong. My bedroom door was wide open and my dog wasn't in the room. That never happens. My brother doesn't enter my room when I'm asleep, and he definitely doesn't let my dog out. Still, I brushed it off until I went downstairs. The first thing my brother asked me was, "Did you bring somebody home last night?" I told him no. His face instantly changed. Fear, not confusion. He asked again, "Are you sure nobody came back with you?" I swore I hadn't. I didn't even talk to anyone besides my friend. That's when he told me what happened. At around 3 a.m., he heard loud noises downstairs. Thinking I was putting together the IKEA desk I had just bought, he got out of bed to yell at me for being too loud. When he reached the landing halfway down the staircase, he flicked on the light. At the bottom of the stairs was a girl. She was standing there, calmly picking up my desk box that had fallen over. She leaned it against the wall and looked straight up at him. Neither of them said a word. I asked why he didn't confront her or call the police. He said my German Shepherd was standing right next to her, completely relaxed, so he assumed she was someone I had brought home. What unsettled him most was that she didn't panic at all when she saw him. She acted like she belonged there. After locking eyes, she casually walked into the living room instead of going out the front door, which was literally 2 feet behind her. He turned the light off and went back to bed, deciding to ask me who she was in the morning. That's when everything clicked. My bedroom door had been wide open and my dog wasn't with me. Whoever that girl was, at some point, she had been in my room. So this is a story from around 10 years ago. I was 16 or 17 at the time, but I recently discovered this sub and it instantly brought these memories flooding back to me. At the time, I kind of just brushed it off because nothing bad ended up happening to me, and I put it down to, I guess shit just happens to you when you are a woman walking alone at night. But looking back now, I realize how creepy it really was. I was coming home on my own on a Thursday night after being out at a pub with some friends. We had been out a little bit more centrally in the city, so I had taken a bus on my own to get home to a residential neighborhood. I had done this route hundreds of times, so I didn't see it as being particularly dangerous, especially as I live in a fairly nice neighborhood. It was only about 11 p.m., but because I lived in a residential area and it was the middle of the working week, When I got off the bus at my stop, it was absolutely dead and there was nobody around. Again, this didn't spook me particularly, as it's only about a 5 to 10 minute walk from the bus stop to my house. As I turned down a long residential street that leads towards my house, I noticed a guy walking further down the street. This put me a little on edge, but I was reassured by the fact that he had his back to me and was walking away from me down the street. As I kept walking down the street, I noticed the guy turn around and clock me. That's fine, I thought. I always turn around when I hear somebody walking behind me at night, so there's nothing weird about that. But I noticed as we got further and further down the street, he kept doing it, kept checking if I was still walking in the same direction as him. At this point, I'm starting to get pretty freaked out, particularly as I am painfully aware that we are the only two people around. Just as I was weighing up what I should do, he turned down the path of one of the houses to our right, and I breathed a sigh of relief. He's going into his house. I was just being paranoid the whole time. The houses in my area are terraced, with the front doors being kind of embedded into an enclave at the front of the house. What this means is that from where I was standing, about 50 feet away or so, I couldn't actually see the front door of the house, as it was obscured by the wall. However, I saw him walk down the path and disappear into the front door enclave, so my logical conclusion was that he was letting himself into his house. I can't describe exactly what made me feel like this, but after that initial feeling of relief wore off, I suddenly got this really bad feeling, so I stopped walking and just stood there. There was this tiny voice in my head that said, "What if he's just faking you out?" The feeling became so strong that I stepped off the pavement and ducked down behind a parked car and just waited. After a couple of minutes of crouching behind the car staring at the house, I saw movement and my heart stopped. The man came back down the path, out into the street, and was looking around, looking for me. He must have been waiting for me in the doorway, knowing that if I kept walking, I wouldn't see him until it was too late. Unfortunately for him, his hiding place also meant that he couldn't see me, so when I didn't walk past as he anticipated, he had to come back out into the street to try and work out where I was. Looking back now, I probably should have called the police at this point, but as a scared teenager, my fight or flight brain took over and I sprinted down one of the roads running perpendicular to the street that we were on, as I knew I could use it to take a slightly longer route home. I didn't stop running until I got home, where I quickly double-locked the door behind me. Amazingly, I didn't even think to wake anyone in my family up. I literally just went to bed, and then woke up the next morning and went to school. I dread to think what would have happened if I hadn't just suddenly gotten a bad feeling and stopped walking. Part of me thinks that on some subconscious level, my brain must have registered not hearing the front door shut after the man had approached it, and therefore triggered an alarm in my head. But I had no perception of this at the time. Lesson learned: trust your gut. I'll try not to make this too long, but I just want to put this out there for kids and parents. Not even your employer can be trusted. So, it was the summer of 2004. I was 15 at the time and working weekends at a skate park, running the registers and keeping up shop. I was the only female employee there. The reason I got the job, I thought at the time, was because I used to hang out there a lot prior to being offered a position. They used to host events and hardcore/rock shows a ton. Those were extremely fun and the place where all my friends gathered for a good time, so we got to know the owners pretty well. Now, the two guys that owned the shop were in their 40s, overweight and balding. Typical older white guys, but they were extremely nice. Let's call them Doug and Mark. Doug was always more serious about the business, always trying to come up with ideas to better it and rarely joking around. He was also married with kids. Mark, on the other hand, seemed like Doug's minion. He was usually out running errands, making calls, or cleaning the shop. He was a single guy. He was very outgoing and silly, so we always had fun with him around, until one day when the fun stopped. Before I tell you about the scariest moment of my life, I'll inform you of the events, or what I'd like to call red flags, leading up to it. On one occasion, we were hosting a show where a local metal band was playing. There were lots of people there. Kids and adults alike were skating and running up and down the ramps and bowls. Everybody just generally having a good time. Then Mark suddenly came up behind me as I was talking with my friend Katie. He picked me up and swung me over his shoulder and started tickling me and spinning me around, right in the middle of the crowd. I laughed it off and was yelling for him to stop in a giggly voice, but I was honestly a bit creeped out as he had never touched me before, even in a friendly way. Even at 15, I found this inappropriate for a man in his 40s to be so touchy on me. After about a minute, he put me down, was laughing and apologizing. I didn't think much of it anymore and thought maybe I was overreacting. A week or two went by and I noticed Mark was giving me flirty looks and sticking his tongue out at me when he was around. Again, I didn't think much of it as he was a super nice guy. Thought he was just being funny. One day, Mark called me into the back. We had 2 doors right behind the register that led to our stockroom. As Doug sat at the register on a business call when we got to the back room, he picked me up, set me on the washing machine, and told me he wanted to kiss me. I automatically shut him down. He then tries to persuade me to lift up my shirt for him. At this point, I'm really freaked out, and I'm just hoping Doug comes through those doors any second. Again, I firmly tell him no, as I hop down and proceed to walk to the shop front again. That's when Doug opens the door and asks, "Hey, what are you guys doing? Did Mark show you our butterfly collection?" I just respond with, no. And I walk out. The 2 follow me. The rest of the day was pretty uneventful and I just wanted it to end. I usually got off of work around 6 or 7, but around 5, Doug asked me to go with Mark to run some errands. He jokingly said, "Take my credit card, but don't give it to Mark." All I could think about was how awkward this ride was going to be, as we hadn't talked since the incident earlier that day. I was really dreading this trip, but I had no idea what was about to unfold. We get in the car and drive to my high school, which is on the other side of town, in a medium-sized busy city, but about 5 minutes away from my house. And as we pull into the back parking lot on a Saturday, I ask him what we were doing here. He responds by saying, "I'm scouting out a new area for a skate park. It's behind the school here." This is when I start to get nervous, but I hope it's true because I did know they were trying to expand locations at the time. He gets out of the car and motions for me to get out and come along. I hesitantly do so. We start walking to the back of the school and he's just talking about his visions of the new park. Nothing too serious. That's when we approach the woods. Not a wooded area, straight up dense forest-like woods, ones you can barely walk through. That's when he says, "Take my hand. Come on. I'll show you the spot." This is when the alarms go off in my head and I realize I could be in real danger if I go with this creep. In my head, I'm contemplating running or just going along with him because I didn't know which one would make my situation worse at the time. Now I know I should have run. This pondering seemed like it went on forever, when in reality it was probably only a few seconds. Thankfully, I paused a good second before making any decisions because that's when my cell phone rang. I honestly forgot I had it on me. It was my mom asking me if she could pick me up early so we could go to dinner. That's when I tell her with a sense of urgency, "Yes, I'm at the high school. Come get me. Now." I think she could hear the fear in my voice and left immediately because she was there in less than 5 minutes. During those 5 minutes, I tell Mark I have to go and wait on my mom. He seemed agitated but agreed and walked me to the front steps of the school to wait. He didn't say bye or anything. He just suddenly walked briskly to his car. My mom shows up a couple of minutes later. I hop in quicker than I've ever done anything in my life. I know I must have been shaking. I tell her I'm not in the mood to eat and just drop me off at home. She asked me if I'm okay and I said yes, and that I and a coworker were just scouting there for a new spot. I get dropped off at home and I'm just in shock and full of fear. I quit working there that day. I just never went back. I didn't explain anything to anyone and I've only told my boyfriend and a couple of friends about this. I'm 100% convinced, looking back on all the red flags and the fact that Doug didn't seem to trust Mark. Doug was actually a good guy, that if I had gone into those woods, I wouldn't be here today. Who knows what he would have done to me? Murder? Worse? It's very weird when you survive something like that. It's never really seemed real to me, but it very much was. I have a 12-year-old daughter now, and I try to teach her about safety and predators all the time. That kind of thing can change you and change the parent you become. An update to this was that about 2 years later, Mark called my house phone. I don't know how he got my number, and he told me he was in Istanbul, Turkey, and about to open a skate shop there. I just said, "Please don't call me anymore," and hung up. Luckily, my nightmare was over after that, but hearing from him was like talking to the devil. I really hope that man is dead or in jail so he can't hurt anybody else. I've always wondered if Doug ever found out about Mark and if maybe Mark had to flee the country for a crime he committed, landing him in Istanbul. This turned out to be longer than I intended, but the point is, as a woman or girl especially, never trust anyone who's been a creep to you. I don't trust much of anyone anymore. Hey, so this happened a long time ago, so Pardon if I can't remember all the details just right, but I know it definitely happened, as others have commemorated my story over time. When I was in 2nd grade, I needed the bathroom, so I asked if I could go. The teacher gave me permission, and I walked down to the end of the hall near where it opened up to the playgrounds. We had had legitimate lockdowns because of danger in that area, especially since a big old gate was always open, even when the school was closed, on the edge of the playground near where I was going to do my business. As I turned into the bathroom, I could hear a man's voice harshly scolding someone with some cuss words. Now, this was weird because I was a girl going into the girls' bathroom, but I thought nothing of it and walked in, like the stupid kid I was. I saw a man sitting in the center stall with the door open. He looked up and saw me, and in that moment I could tell something was wrong. His pants were down and his hand was pressed harshly to his head. His eyes looked crazed and he reached out to grab me. I jumped back a bit and he sat back down on the toilet, his fists clenched. After a beat, he looked up at me again with an enraged expression and made a flurry of hand motions, screaming at me to get out. I ran outside and waited by the doorway, waiting for him to finish up, thinking he needed privacy and was just frustrated and embarrassed that I had caught him with the door open. I waited. After all, I still had to go. Time passed and he never left, just yelling and muttering angrily under his breath as I listened. I would have left and gone back to class, but at that age, I had developed a freeze response to intense situations. My friend eventually came to get me, saying I was gone too long. I went back despite still needing to go and figured out I had been standing there for half an hour, waiting to use the bathroom. When the teacher asked, I told her, and like the rest of the irresponsible teachers at that school, she just ignored it and said I was lying. I would have passed this off as just my imagination at best, or just a man having a bad day at its worst, had it not been for what happened a year later. A woman I had never seen before came to talk to me about this man I had seen. I told her everything I could and asked, "Why so long? This happened a year ago. Why not interview me then?" She gave a nervous laugh and said something along the lines of, "More brave kids telling their teachers about this man, so it likely wasn't just my isolated incident that caused her to ask around about this guy." Looking back on it, I get the feeling the situation was likely much more serious than I was made to believe by my friends and teachers. "23-year-old guy here. I live in a pretty safe neighborhood and usually always lock my doors. Last night I apparently didn't. It was not too long after I had taken my dogs out for the last time and was turning off the TV and lights when one of my dogs started growling. Not too weird since he sometimes does that when people walk by the house. He only does it to certain people though, not everyone. I then heard the front door open and somebody walk in. My dog started barking. My other dog, who loves all people, came running from the other room to greet our guest. At the same time I was reacting to what was happening and went, "What the heck? Who are you?" Standing in the hall was a guy in his mid to late 20s. He was skinny and tall. Oh, wait. I don't think I'm in the right place." He genuinely seemed confused. I replied with, "Hell no you aren't. Please get out." He apologized and said he was coming to hang out with a friend and just accidentally went to the wrong place. I asked him what house he was looking for and he said a number that was just a couple numbers off from mine. He apologized again and left. He seemed nice and non-threatening, but I was still kind of spooked. This morning I was ready to laugh the whole thing off. I was planning on telling my neighbor, a couple in their 30s, what happened. I didn't know them all too well, but we have talked before. Luckily, I caught up with one of them when I was taking my dogs out. I didn't want to come off like I was mad or scared over what happened, so I casually said, "I'm sure he told you about it, but your friend paid me a surprise visit last night." My neighbor gave me this confused look and said, "What are you talking about?" "Your friend. He walked into my house last night thinking it was your place." My neighbor was quiet for a second and then said, I don't want to alarm you, but I have no idea what you're talking about. We didn't have a friend over last night." Recently, I had to make a quick run to Walmart after work for a few smaller items I'd forgotten the day before. About halfway into my trip, I was approached by a woman and a young girl who asked me to buy a pack of diapers for them. Now, I do enjoy helping people whenever I can, but something felt incredibly off-putting about this situation. Something about the way she strode right up to me and asked. It all felt very rehearsed. I told her no in the most polite way I could muster, and she nodded and went on. I was prepared to deal with potentially having turned a woman away who genuinely needed help, but like I mentioned, something still felt really wrong about it. I completed the rest of my shopping and was well on my way to forgetting the encounter, but when I made my way up to the self-checkout, suddenly the same lady and little girl made a beeline for me. She doesn't look at me or speak. She and the girl just start scanning not only the diapers, but also items they had hidden in their clothes, racking up a huge total on the self-checkout. Completely stupefied that she just brazenly assumed I'd pay for it all, I got the attention of the associate and quietly explained the situation, making it clear I wasn't trying to make a scene, but I simply didn't know these people and I wasn't about to pay for their belongings, now that I knew it was just a ploy. He told me they've had to deal with her before and I wasn't the first encounter she had a run-in with. He put on his most patient customer service voice and talked to the woman, at which point she pretended not to speak English, despite having had a pretty firm grasp on it earlier when asking me to buy diapers for them. She just kept pointing at me as if to indicate she and the girl were with me. Thankfully, she wasn't fooling the associate, who by now had not only cleared her items from my checkout, but had also placed himself between me and the woman, still pretending she couldn't understand him and still adamant that we were together. She was getting louder and things were escalating now, so I made a point to pay for my belongings and hightail it out of there. I hurried out to the car, closing the door just in time to see the little girl nearly sprinting to catch up with me, the woman not far behind her. Panic set in and suddenly I was trying to lock the doors, throw my groceries in and buckle up all at once. She was frantically tapping at my windows as I cranked the car with what I assumed at first was her nail. I wasn't going to look until I caught the sun gleaming off of something. I turned to find she wasn't tapping with her nail, but instead with the tip of a switchblade, making slow, deliberate slicing motions with it. Just about the only thing I could think to do was throw my car into reverse and get the heck out of there, and as I did, she and the girl slowly walked in front of my car, heading back toward the store. As she was walking by, the woman turned and looked at me and gave what I could only describe as the most sinister smile I've ever seen. Something was just so deeply insidious about the way she gave me that knowing look, a truly diabolical version of the kind of look a mischievous kid gives you when they know they are doing something they're not supposed to. I was shaken but ultimately okay, though I'd be lying if I said I didn't look over my shoulder for a long while. In 2007, when I was 12 years old, my family and I took a trip to Key Biscayne, Florida, with some of my cousins and family friends. Naturally, while at the resort, my cousins and I would all hang out at the kids club, where there were always a bunch of kids to hang out with. Epic chicken fingers and ranch dressing and fun games for us to play. There was a director of the kids club who watched us and facilitated all the activities. His name was Dan. In retrospect, Dan was a major creep. He was around 40 years old, super tall and skinny, and was balding badly. The worst part is that sometimes he had us call him Dan the Animal Man. Side note, these sorts of memories leave me in awe of how naive and blinded to danger I was, and I'm sure most were as a kid. If I ever met this guy now, I literally wouldn't want to get within a 5-foot radius of him, and there I was as a 12-year-old thinking he rocked. Time is a wonderful thing. Anyhow, I digress. It was made clear to all of us that for unknown reasons, Dan was leaving the hotel in the week. None of this fazed me. On our last day at the hotel, I lost my cell phone. It was a bright blue chocolate cell phone, if anyone remembers those gems with the spinning wheel. I quickly told my parents I couldn't find my phone, and considering this was already the second phone I lost that year, my mom yelled at me and told me that if I didn't find it, I'd be grounded. I hurriedly ran around the hotel looking for my phone, and along my way, I went into the kids club to see if anyone had found it. The room that was typically bustling with kids in activity was eerily quiet and empty. Dan was sitting on a couch all by himself. "Hey Dan, did you by any chance see my phone?" I asked. Dan responded, "Yes, I found it and put it in the lost and found in the basement. Come with me." Thinking absolutely nothing of this, I mindlessly followed behind Dan as he led me around the back of the hotel. We walked for about 3 minutes and arrived at the foot of a stairwell going into the basement. We were standing at the back of the hotel in a strange area and no one else was in sight. "It's down here?" I asked, confused. I was staring down a long flight of stairs leading to absolute darkness. The walls were made up of unpainted concrete and it looked no more than a storage area, let alone a basement with a lost and found. Dan nodded and held the door open for me, motioning for me to head down the steps. Something in my 12-year-old self suddenly woke up. I'm not sure if it was instinct, fear, or luck, but I immediately knew I had to get out of there. Before Dan could say or do anything, I blurted out, "Oh, never mind, I think I left it with my mom," and darted away from the stairwell and back to the hotel lobby. I was so shaken up because something about that situation didn't feel right. I knew he was going to hurt me, and as a kid who wore rose-colored glasses and was overly trusting of others, this really meant something. I tried to compose myself and figured I'd investigate a bit more. I walked up to the concierge of the hotel and asked them where the lost and found is because I had lost my phone. The nice woman at the front desk told me that the lost and found was right there at their desk. She then asked me what kind of phone I lost, and after I told her it was a blue chocolate flip phone, she smiled and pulled it out of the box under her desk. "Somebody turned it in here earlier," she said, and handed me my phone. "Wait, you're telling me the lost and found isn't in the basement?" I stammered. "No, sweetheart. The hotel is under construction and the basement is just being rebuilt. There's no electricity down there or anything yet." This scared the shit out of me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this man was really dangerous. At the time, I was sharing a hotel room with my cousin, and she was the only person I told. Considering she was 8 at the time, I think I really freaked her out. I'm now 26, and I still think back to that moment and wonder, what if? What would have happened if I went down the basement with Dan the Animal Man? It feels truly like one of the most critical junctures of my entire life, and I'm so happy I knew to get out of there before it was too late. I recently contacted the hotel to inquire about a past kid club employee named Dan from 2007, just to see if he's still around, or on a sex offenders list, or in jail. I even told HR this whole story, but they still refused to give me any information about him and sounded pretty sketchy about it. I will continue to do research, and if I ever find more information, I'll add to the post. I was around 13 years old and at the shopping center with my parents. I wanted to go off on my own and wander around by myself for a while, and my parents agreed. After a little while, I was stopped by a woman in casual clothes. She told me that she was an undercover cop and I was suspected of shoplifting. Because I was young, I was terrified. I didn't ask her for her ID or anything like that. I didn't know I could question authority. She asked to look through my bag and I let her, insisting I hadn't stolen anything. She asked me how old I was and who I was there with, and then she asked me something that still sent chills down my spine. "Are your parents expecting you to go home with them tonight?" I told her of course they were. Why wouldn't they be? She then insisted I had to follow her to go and figure out the shoplifting thing. I went. She was leading me towards the exit. By the grace of God, before we got there, we bumped into my dad. He asked what was going on and I told him. As I was explaining the situation, the woman got on her phone and was talking to someone, saying things like, "Oh, this isn't the right girl," and then hung up and said, "Sorry, wrong person," and abruptly walked off. My dad and I stood there dumbfounded. When my mom found out about the situation, she was really unimpressed by the way the undercover cop handled the situation. She took me to center management the next day and complained to them about how I was treated by their undercover cop. When the woman answered, "We don't employ undercover cops in this center." I have no idea what that woman had planned for me, but I thank my lucky stars every day that we ran into my dad. Around 2007, I was getting my PhD at the University of Florida. I, 30-ish female, lived in Gainesville in a condo that I owned by myself. I had a friend who was walking across the United States. We'll call him Captain. Captain decided to spend the winter at my house, so he got a mutual friend to drive him from Alabama, where he had last stopped walking, to my house in Gainesville. We had a pleasant Thanksgiving, and then Captain just kind of chilled at my house for the next several months. It wasn't too big of a deal because I was mostly staying at my boyfriend's house, but it was a little bit much. When it was time for him to get back to walking, he asked if I would drive him back to the exact location he had left in Alabama. Looking forward to having my house back, I agreed to drive him one day when I was out of school. I don't remember what route we took or where it was, but I remember that the drive wasn't that long, relatively speaking. It seems like it would have been, but I guess it was about 5 to 6 hours one way. I dropped him off in the early evening and headed back for Florida. This meant that I was driving at night, by myself, in an unknown part of the country. Conveniently, the GPS technology that we had at the time gave me this extremely backwards route back to Florida. To get to where I had dropped off Captain, we stayed on the freeway for most of the time, and then it was about 10 miles off the freeway. Well, Google Maps or whatever the app was decided that faster way was to take me on all of these little back roads through Alabama backcountry. Serious deliverance vibes. Seriously. So I'm already a little freaked out and occasionally checking in with my boyfriend to let him know where I am. I've driven alone at night tons, but my history with respect to strangers had made me hyper-vigilant. At some point, I became aware that there was a car behind me. I didn't assume that was anything weird until the car stayed with me for several miles. Again, I just shoved it off to maybe Google Maps, giving them the same weird route. But because I was paying attention to the car behind me, I didn't notice when I pulled through some small town that I was taking a left at the wrong intersection. There were two intersections very close together, and I was accidentally in the left lane to turn left at the intersection before the one I was supposed to turn at. No biggie, I figured. It's like 2 in the morning, so when the light changed, I drove straight through the intersection and took a left at the next intersection. The car behind me did the same thing. I realized at that point that I was definitely being followed. I immediately called my boyfriend and asked him to look up the non-emergency police number for the area where I was. I tried to give him my nearest location, but like any dude who has never been the victim of any kind of assault, he thought I was overreacting. He was in the middle of something and therefore didn't look up the number for me. In retrospect, I should have absolutely just called 911, but I didn't want to make a big deal out of something that could have been nothing. But that nothing was quickly becoming something indeed, because I'd been on back roads in Alabama without a gas station for a long time and my car was in need of gas. That meant that I would have to exit the vehicle at a gas station that was probably not well manned at this time of night, by myself. I was low-key freaking out. It didn't help that I couldn't see the driver of the car behind me. It was dark and the car had tinted windows. Also, Alabama backwoods roads are pretty damn dark. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, but I couldn't get a glimpse of the driver. I honestly could not figure out why this person targeted me, and at first I had laughed it off as some kind of Southern football vendetta. I had a UF license plate frame, Go Gators, and was trying to convince myself that this person was just trying to scare me because they liked one of our rival schools. Given that I am a tall woman, it may have been difficult to identify that I was a woman in the car, but either way, this person was clearly following me, and given that I had to stop my car, I was feeling increasingly at risk. Finally, my backwards woods route took me into a relatively larger metropolitan area. I was finally on the streets with streetlights, and businesses were still lit up. I started to feel safer, but I still had to stop for gas. I had already made a plan as far as that was concerned, but I wanted the guy behind me to know that I was onto him. So at the first intersection that was well lit, I turned fully around in my car seat and stared at him while pretending to talk on the phone. I did this for the entire time the light was red. I wanted it to look like I was describing his car and his features to whoever was on the phone. Not long after this, I found a gas station that was well lit up. I was driving on fumes and praying that I wouldn't run out of gas in backwoods Alabama. I pulled into the gas station so that my driver's side door was adjacent to the door of the gas station, jumped out, and ran inside. I let the attendant know that I was being followed, and he walked out from behind the counter and walked through the windows and said that nobody was there. I was sure that the car had been behind me when I pulled into the station, but seeing that I ran inside, they must have driven off. I still have no idea what the guy's intention was, but he followed me for easily an hour and a half, like 100 miles. It felt predatory as hell. Thankfully, I was able to gas up my car under the watchful eye of the gas station attendant, and the attendant told me the quickest way to the freeway. My trip was uneventful after that, but I was still shaking and thoroughly pissed at my boyfriend for not taking me seriously.